I am Irene Patterson, 67 years old, and I never imagined my own children would abandon me at a gas station in Montana during our family trip. Let her try to come back alone, they laughed as they drove away, thinking their little prank would teach their demanding mother a lesson. They expected tears, panic calls, and desperate pleas for help. Instead, that moment became the unexpected beginning of my second life. If you are watching this right now, let me know where you are from. Hit subscribe and prepare for a story about reinvention after betrayal. My story begins long before that fateful day at the gas station. For most of my adult life, I was Irene Patterson, the widow of Thomas Patterson, a kind and gentle accountant who lost his battle with pancreatic cancer 15 years ago. His death left me alone to raise our 3 children, though by that time they were already young adults, beginning to forge their own paths in the world. Amanda, my oldest at 42, had already established herself as a promising corporate lawyer when her father passed. She always possessed a sharp mind and even sharper ambition traits that served her well in her career but created distance between us. Following Thomas's death, Amanda seemed to pull away even further, as if my grief was somehow an inconvenience to her carefully structured life. She married Richard, a fellow attorney, and they have 2 children, Emma and James, who I barely know despite my desperate attempts to be part of their lives. Jackson, my middle child at 38, took his father's death the hardest. Always the sensitive artist of the family, he completely abandoned the business degree he had been half-heartedly pursuing and dedicated himself fully to his painting. I worried constantly about his financial stability, which led me to continue supporting him well into his 30s. This financial dependence created a toxic dynamic between us. The more I helped him, the more he resented my presence in his life, especially when I questioned his career choices or suggested more practical applications of his talent. Lauren, my youngest at 35, had always been the rebel. By the time her father died, she had already married and divorced her high school sweetheart, a decision I never fully supported. When her second marriage also ended in divorce last year, she moved back into my home with her teenage son Tyler. Our relationship was the most volatile of all. Living under the same roof magnified our differences, and our arguments could shake the very foundation of the house. After Thomas died, I clung to certain traditions, believing they would somehow preserve what remained of our family. The annual summer vacation was the most sacred of these traditions. Each year, regardless of protests or scheduling conflicts, I insisted that all 3 of my children join me for a week-long trip. In the early years after Thomas's death, these vacations provided genuine comfort and connection, but as time passed, they became increasingly forced and tense affairs. This particular year, I had chosen a driving tour of the northern states. We would begin in our hometown of Boise, Idaho, travel through Montana, North Dakota, and eventually reach Minnesota before turning back. I spent months planning the perfect itinerary, researching attractions and booking accommodations that would suit everyone's tastes, or at least what I thought were their tastes. The trouble began almost immediately. Amanda arrived late to our departure point, already irritated that she had to use precious vacation days for this trip rather than the Bahamas retreat she and Richard had been planning. Jackson showed up with a new tattoo that covered much of his forearm, which I couldn't help but comment on. Lauren was sullen from the start, angry that I had insisted Tyler stay with his father so we could have adult time together. The first 2 days of our trip were a masterclass in passive aggression. I tried to maintain a cheerful facade, pointing out beautiful landscapes and interesting historical markers, while my children responded with minimal enthusiasm. In retrospect, I can see how my own behavior contributed to the tension. I criticized Amanda's parenting choices when she mentioned that Emma was struggling in school. I questioned Jackson about his finances when he talked about a gallery showing that hadn't gone as well as expected. I lectured Lauren about her dating apps when she mentioned meeting someone new. I believed I was offering guidance and wisdom. They experienced it as judgment and control. On the 3rd night of our trip, we stayed in a small hotel in western Montana. During dinner at the attached restaurant, the facade finally cracked. It began with something small. I commented on Jackson's 3rd glass of wine, suggesting that perhaps he should slow down. He snapped back that he was a grown man who didn't need his mother monitoring his alcohol intake. From there, the floodgates opened. Amanda joined in listing all the ways I had undermined her parenting decisions over the years. Lauren brought up how I had never supported her marriages, but then criticized her for getting divorced. The grievances poured out years of resentment bubbling to the surface in a public restaurant, while plates of untouched food grew cold between us. I defended myself, of course. I reminded them of all I had sacrificed, how I had devoted my life to their well-being after their father died. The argument grew increasingly heated until Amanda stood up, threw her napkin on the table, and declared she was going back to the hotel room. Jackson and Lauren followed, leaving me alone at the table with 4 unfinished meals and a restaurant full of curious onlookers. That night I cried myself to sleep in my separate hotel room. Part of me recognized the truth in their words, but another part felt deeply wronged and unappreciated. I had lost my husband, their father, and had done the best I could on my own. Didn't that count for anything? The next morning, nobody mentioned the argument. We packed the car in silence and continued our journey. I still believed we could salvage the trip. I still believed that somewhere beneath all that anger my children remembered that they loved me. I was wrong in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The morning after our explosive dinner argument, the silence in the car was deafening. I sat in the passenger seat while Jackson drove, staring out the window at the Montana landscape passing by. The beautiful scenery contrasted sharply with the ugliness that had erupted between us the night before. Amanda busied herself with work emails in the back seat, while Lauren had earbuds firmly planted, her music loud enough that I could hear the faint thump of bass. Around 11 in the morning, we needed to refuel. Jackson pulled into a gas station that seemed to appear out of nowhere along the rural highway. Weathered wood siding a single row of pumps and a small convenience store made up the entire establishment. The nearest town, according to the faded sign, was still 20 miles away. "I need to use the restroom and get some snacks," I announced to no one in particular as Jackson began pumping gas. No one responded, but I didn't think much of it. We were all still nursing our wounds from the previous night's confrontation. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the store. An older gentleman with a weathered face and kind eyes greeted me from behind the counter. His name tag read Bill. I nodded politely and asked for the restroom key, which he handed over with a smile that momentarily lifted my spirits. After using the facilities, I spent several minutes selecting snacks for everyone. Despite our disagreements, I knew Jackson's preference for salty chips, Amanda's weakness for chocolate-covered almonds, and Lauren's fondness for sour candy. I hoped these small peace offerings might begin to thaw the ice between us. Arms full of snacks and beverages, I paid Bill and thanked him for his friendliness. He commented on the beautiful day and asked where we were headed. "Minnesota eventually," I replied. "Family vacation." "That's nice," he said. "Don't get many family trips through here anymore. Everyone's always in such a hurry these days." I nodded in agreement and headed back outside mentally, preparing for more hours of tense silence in the car. Except the car was gone. At first, I thought Jackson had merely repositioned it, perhaps moving to a parking space after filling up. I looked around the small lot, confusion growing as I realized there were no other vehicles besides an old pickup truck that presumably belonged to Bill. "They probably just pulled around back," I reasoned aloud, still clutching the bag of snacks as I walked around the perimeter of the building. But there was nothing there except a dumpster and an ancient soft drink machine. Returning to the front, I stood on the edge of the highway looking both directions for any sign of our blue SUV. Nothing but empty road stretched in both directions, shimmering slightly in the late morning heat. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself. "They wouldn't just leave me." I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping the snacks in my panic. No signal. Of course. We were in the middle of nowhere, Montana, surrounded by mountains that blocked reception. The reality of the situation began to sink in as I stood there feeling foolish with my bag of unwanted peace offerings. My children had abandoned me, left me stranded at a gas station in a state where I knew no one, with nothing but my purse, phone, and a bag of snacks. I returned to the store in a daze. Bill looked up from his crossword puzzle, his expression changing from welcome to concern as he registered the shock on my face. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "They left me," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "My children. They drove away and left me here." Bill's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Now why would they do such a thing? Are you sure they didn't just go up the road a piece? Maybe they needed to turn around." I shook my head, the humiliation burning as hot as my growing anger. No, this was deliberate. I remembered the tension from the night before, the accumulated resentments of years. They think I deserve this. As the minutes ticked by, any hope that this was just a brief, cruel joke faded. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. No blue SUV returning to collect the stranded mother. Bill offered me the use of the store phone, but I didn't know who to call. My children were my emergency contacts. My closest friend lived 2 states away. I had no other family. "They'll come back when they've made their point," I said, with false confidence. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to wonder if that was true. What if they simply continued the vacation without me? What if they drove back to Idaho, leaving me to find my own way home across hundreds of miles? As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Bill's shift was ending. He seemed genuinely troubled by my situation. "Listen," he said, locking the register for the night. "I can't leave you out here. The night manager isn't as well patient with loiterers, even in your circumstance. I've got a small office in back with a cot. Used it myself during winter storms when the roads get bad. You're welcome to it for the night, and tomorrow we can figure something out." Tears of gratitude sprang to my eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what else to do right now." That night, lying on a thin mattress in the back office of a remote gas station, surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of the building settling and distant wildlife, I cried harder than I had since Thomas died. I cried from humiliation, from anger, from the painful acknowledgement that my relationship with my children had deteriorated to this unthinkable point. But something else happened as I lay there in the darkness. Beneath the hurt and outrage, I felt an unexpected twinge of something else. Something that felt strangely like relief, like freedom. For the first time in 15 years, nobody was expecting anything from me. Nobody was judging my decisions or resenting my presence. In that small, cluttered office smelling of coffee and motor oil, I had my first night of dreamless, peaceful sleep in years. Morning came with the sound of voices and the smell of fresh coffee. I sat up on the cot, momentarily disoriented, until the events of the previous day came flooding back. A soft knock on the office door preceded Bill's weathered face peering in at me. "Morning," he said gently. "Brought you some coffee and a pastry from the warmer. Not much of a breakfast, but it's hot." I accepted his offering gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. I hadn't eaten since lunch the previous day. "I also brought someone to meet you." Bill continued, opening the door wider to reveal a woman who appeared to be in her early 60s. "This is my sister Martha. She runs the diner in town." Martha had Bill's kind eyes, but paired with a no-nonsense demeanor that somehow put me at ease immediately. She looked me over with a mixture of sympathy and practical assessment. "Bill told me what happened," she said without preamble. "That's a terrible thing for family to do to each other. I've got a spare room above the diner. You're welcome to it while you sort things out." Her directness was refreshing after the passive-aggressive dance I'd been performing with my children for years. I thanked her, fighting back a new wave of tears at this unexpected kindness from strangers. Before leaving the gas station, I asked to use Bill's phone again. This time I left voicemails for each of my children. The messages were brief, controlled. I simply stated that I was safe, that I had found temporary lodging, and that I was deeply hurt by their actions. I did not beg them to come back for me. Some last shred of dignity prevented that. Martha drove me into the small town of Pinecrest, a charming collection of buildings that looked like they belonged on a postcard from the 1952. Her diner, aptly named Martha's Place, sat at the center of Main Street. The apartment above it was small but clean, and comfortable, with a view of the distant mountains that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Bathrooms down the hall, kitchens functional but basic, Martha explained as she showed me around. "You're welcome to eat at the diner for free while you're figuring things out." "I can't accept that," I protested. "You don't even know me." Martha shrugged. "Bill's a good judge of character. Besides, I was stranded myself once years ago. Someone helped me. Now I'm helping you. That's how it should work." That afternoon, Martha let me use the diner's phone to check my voicemail. What I heard changed everything. Amanda's voice first. "Mom, where are you? We came back for you after a couple hours. This isn't funny. Call us." Then Jackson, "Mom, seriously, we were just trying to teach you a lesson. We didn't mean for you to actually disappear. Where did you go?" Finally, Lauren, "Mom, If you're trying to scare us, it worked okay. But this has gone on long enough. Call us back." Each message grew progressively more concerned, then angry, then accusatory. The final messages revealed the truth: they had returned to the gas station after driving for about 2 hours, expecting to find me waiting furiously. When they couldn't find me, they assumed I had gotten a ride with someone to teach them a lesson. "She's just being dramatic as usual," Lauren could be heard saying to the others in the background of Amanda's last message. I sat in stunned silence after listening to the messages. The irony was almost too much to bear. They had abandoned me as a lesson then, assumed my disappearance was me abandoning them as a counter-lesson. The dysfunction of our family dynamics couldn't have been more clearly illuminated. "Bad news?" Martha asked, noting my expression as she refilled coffee mugs at a nearby table. "Complicated news," I replied. "It seems my children think I'm teaching them a lesson by disappearing." Martha snorted. "Sounds like they need a lesson or two." Over the following days, I considered my options. I could call my children back, explain what had happened, and arrange for them to come get me. That was the logical, expected course of action. But something held me back. The realization that they had so quickly turned my victimhood into a narrative about my manipulation troubled me deeply. It spoke to patterns in our relationship that went back years, perhaps even predating Thomas's death. Martha introduced me to people in town as Irene, my friend from Idaho who's staying a while. No further explanation was offered and none was requested. The simplicity of this new identity was intoxicating. Nobody in Pinecrest knew about my controlling tendencies, my grief, or my difficult relationship with my children. I could be anyone. A week into my stay, Martha introduced me to James Sullivan, a widowed former professor who now worked as the chief of staff for Pinecrest's mayor. James had come into the diner for his usual lunch and stopped by our table to say hello. "James, this is my friend Irene," Martha said. "Irene James here is the only person keeping our mayor from running this town into the ground." James laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his blue eyes. "Don't let Mayor Davis hear you say that. He still believes he's the one making all the decisions." There was an immediate ease between us that I hadn't experienced with anyone in a long time. When James mentioned that the mayor's office was looking for a temporary administrative assistant while their regular person was out on maternity leave, I surprised myself by expressing interest. "Do you have experience in administration?" James asked. "I managed my husband's accounting practice for 15 years, I replied. "And I raised 3 children, which requires more administrative skill than any office job." James smiled. "Fair point. Why don't you come by tomorrow for an informal interview? Nothing fancy, just a chat with me and the mayor." That night, I made another decision. I wouldn't contact my children yet. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand my own role in our dysfunctional dynamic, and perhaps to discover who Irene Patterson might be when not defined primarily as a grieving widow and difficult mother. The small town of Pinecrest, with its kind strangers and second chances, seemed like the perfect place for that discovery. 6 months passed in Pinecrest like a dream. What had begun as a temporary position in the mayor's office evolved into a permanent role as the office manager. Mayor Davis, a jovial man with political ambitions beyond their small town, quickly came to rely on my organizational skills and straightforward approach. "Irene, I don't know how we functioned before you arrived," he declared one afternoon after I had restructured the filing system and implemented a more efficient meeting schedule. "You've brought order to chaos." I enjoyed the work more than I had expected. There was something deeply satisfying about solving practical problems and seeing immediate results. In my previous life, my energy had been consumed by family dynamics and emotional labor that seemed to yield diminishing returns. Here, my contributions were valued and acknowledged. My living situation had changed as well. After 2 months above the diner, I had saved enough from my job to rent a small cottage on the edge of town. The space was mine alone, decorated according to my taste, without having to consider anyone else's preferences. I planted flowers in window boxes and adopted a stray cat who appeared on my porch one rainy evening. I named him Thomas after my late husband, a small connection to my past life that brought comfort rather than pain. Martha remained a steadfast friend, and through her I developed a circle of acquaintances that gradually deepened into genuine friendships. There was Diane, the librarian, who shared my love of mystery novels; Harold, the retired high school principal who taught me to play chess; And of course, James Sullivan, whose friendship had evolved into something more complex and promising. James and I began spending time together outside of work. First, it was just coffee, after particularly challenging days at the office. Then came dinner at the local steakhouse, long walks by the river that ran through town, and eventually quiet evenings on my porch talking until the stars emerged. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," Irene James told me one such evening. "You arrived here with nothing but the clothes on your back, yet you never seemed desperate or defeated. There's a resilience to you that's remarkable." I hadn't shared the full story of my abandonment with anyone except Martha, but that night, sitting beside James with crickets providing a gentle soundtrack to our conversation, I told him everything. The years of tension with my children, the disastrous family vacation, the gas station, and their assumption that my disappearance was an act of manipulation. James listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he took my hand in his, a gesture so natural it didn't occur to me to pull away. "Have you contacted them at all since those first voicemails?" he asked. I shook my head. "I check periodically to see if they've left new messages. They have, but they've evolved from concern to anger to occasional updates delivered with passive-aggressive commentary. Amanda mentioned filing a missing persons report, but since I'm clearly not missing, just gone, the police apparently didn't pursue it very seriously. And you haven't felt compelled to reach out, to let them know you're safe." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. I considered my answer carefully. At first, I was simply hurt and angry. Then, as time passed, I realized I was experiencing a kind of freedom I hadn't known since before Thomas died. Maybe even before we married. I'm discovering who I am outside of my relationships with my children, and I'm not ready to reintroduce that complication. James nodded slowly. "I understand that. After Caroline died, I had a similar experience. Grief is its own kind of prison, but it can also be a cocoon. Sometimes you emerge as someone new." During these months, I occasionally checked social media to glimpse my children's lives continuing without me. Amanda had been promoted at her law firm. Jackson had a new gallery showing. Lauren had moved out of my house and into her own apartment. They all periodically posted public messages about their missing mother, portraying themselves as the worried, dutiful children searching for their vanished parent. The disparity between their public performance and the reality of our last interaction stirred a slow-burning anger in me. About 4 months into my new life, James encouraged me to pursue a project I had mentioned casually. Years ago, before Thomas's illness consumed our lives, I had been involved in community advocacy for senior citizens. James suggested I develop a program for Pinecrest's aging population, many of whom struggled with isolation and limited resources. The mayor would support it, James assured me, especially if we frame it as a pilot program that could bring positive attention to the town. With James's encouragement and Mayor Davis's enthusiastic backing, I created Silver Connections, a program that matched seniors with volunteers for everything from home repairs to tech support to simple companionship. The initiative took off quickly, filling a need that had long gone unaddressed in the community. To my surprise, the program caught the attention of the state governor, Eleanor Hughes, a pragmatic woman known for identifying and replicating successful community programs. 6 months after I had been left at that gas station, Governor Hughes visited Pinecrest specifically to learn more about Silver Connections. "This is exactly the kind of innovative, low-cost solution we should be implementing statewide," she declared after I had guided her through a presentation on the program's structure and outcomes. "Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to consult with my staff on how we might adapt this for other communities?" Standing there in the town hall receiving recognition from the governor of Montana, I couldn't help but wonder what my children would think if they could see me now. The mother they had dismissed and abandoned was being praised as an innovator and problem solver. The woman they had left behind was moving forward in ways none of us could have anticipated. Governor Hughes and I developed a surprising rapport during her visit. A widow herself, she recognized in me, a kindred spirit who had rebuilt her life after loss. Before leaving Pinecrest, she extended an open invitation to visit her in the capital whenever I wished to discuss the expansion of Silver Connections. As spring turned to summer in my new home, I found myself in the midst of a transformation I had never sought but now embraced wholeheartedly. The controlling, critical mother who had driven her children to an act of cruelty had been left behind at that gas station. In her place stood a woman discovering her value beyond family roles, exploring new possibilities, and perhaps most surprisingly, opening her heart to love again. 2 years after being abandoned in Montana, I barely recognized my own life. What had begun as a consulting relationship with Governor Eleanor Hughes had evolved into a permanent position as her special advisor on senior affairs. The Silver Connections program had been implemented in 15 counties across the state, with plans for statewide adoption by the following year. My cottage in Pinecrest had been rented out to a young teacher as I now spent most of my time in Helena, the state capital. The governor had helped me secure a comfortable apartment within walking distance of the Capitol building. Thomas the cat had made the transition with remarkable adaptability, seeming to enjoy his elevated status as companion to someone who now moved in political circles. My relationship with James had evolved as well, though, in ways that required adjustment. His position with the Pinecrest mayor kept him tied to our small town, while my new role demanded my presence in Helena. We maintained our connection through weekend visits, long phone conversations, and an unwavering commitment to making things work despite the distance. "I'm proud of you," James told me during one of his visits to Helena. We were walking through the governor's garden, enjoying a rare moment of privacy. Not everyone gets a second act like this, and fewer still make the most of it the way you have. I squeezed his hand, still marveling at how natural such gestures of affection now felt. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Irene Patterson was a widow, and a mother who measured her worth by her children's approval. Who am I now? "Whoever you choose to be," James replied simply. "That's the gift you've been given, though I wouldn't recommend the delivery method." Despite immersing myself in this new life, I continued to maintain a distant awareness of my children's lives. The modern world made this all too easy. Social media allowed me glimpses into their activities without any direct contact. Amanda's children were growing rapidly. Jackson had finally achieved some recognition in the art world, and Lauren appeared to have entered a stable relationship. What troubled me were their periodic public posts about their missing mother. On significant dates like my birthday or the anniversary of their father's death, they would share old family photos with captions expressing concern about my continued absence and portraying themselves as the victims of my inexplicable disappearance. "Another year without answers," Amanda wrote on the second anniversary of the gas station incident. "Mom, if you're out there, please know we're still looking for you." These performances of dutiful, concerned children ignited an anger in me that sometimes threatened to overwhelm the peace I had found. They knew exactly what they had done. They had left me stranded and alone. That their narrative so completely erased their own culpability felt like a second abandonment, this time of the truth. After one particularly sanctimonious post from Lauren, accompanied by a photo of her tearfully holding one of my old scarves, I made a significant decision. I legally changed my last name from Patterson to Caldwell, my mother's maiden name. The change offered practical benefits in my professional life, where I had been using only my first name to avoid any possibility of my children tracking me down through news articles or government publications about Silver Connections. But the name change was more than practical. It was symbolic, a shedding of the identity that had been defined by my marriage and motherhood. Irene Caldwell was not a victim or a disappearance statistic. She was a respected advisor to a governor, a program developer, a woman building a meaningful life on her own terms. Governor Hughes supported my decision, having become something of a mentor over the 2 years we had worked together. A formidable woman, in her early 60s, Eleanor had navigated the male-dominated world of state politics with intelligence and strategic thinking that I deeply admired. "Sometimes we need to reinvent ourselves to become who we truly are," she remarked when I showed her my new driver's license. "Besides, Caldwell has a nice political ring to it, should you ever decide to pursue that path." The idea of entering politics myself had never occurred to me, but Eleanor's casual suggestion planted a seed that would grow in unexpected ways over the coming years. As my second winter in Helena approached, James surprised me with a visit on a random Tuesday. Finding him waiting outside my office at the end of the day was unusual enough to cause momentary concern. "Is everything all right? I wasn't expecting you until the weekend?" James smiled, though I detected a nervousness I had never seen in him before. "Everything's fine, better than fine. I just couldn't wait until Saturday to see you." That evening, after dinner at my favorite restaurant in Helena, James suggested a walk through the illuminated grounds of the capital. The night was cold, but clear stars visible despite the city lights. Near the central fountain now drained for winter, James stopped and turned to face me. "Irene, I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about the distance, about our future." My heart stuttered in my chest. Was he ending things? Had the strain of our long-distance relationship finally become too much? Instead, James reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box. "I've loved 2 women in my life. My Caroline, who I lost to cancer, and you, who I found because of an act of cruelty that turned into the greatest blessing of my later years." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I'm not asking you to give up your life here or the important work you're doing. I'm just asking if you would consider building a shared life with me, whatever form that needs to take." Tears blurred my vision as I looked at the ring, then at this kind, steady man who had become my unexpected second chance at happiness. "Yes," I said simply. "Yes, I would like that very much." The local newspaper in Pinecrest ran a small announcement about our engagement, including a photograph of us that James had asked a colleague to take after I accepted his proposal. At the time, I didn't think much about the public nature of the announcement. Pinecrest was a small town far from anywhere my children were likely to see or care about. I didn't realize then that this small newspaper item would eventually become the thread that unraveled my carefully constructed new life, bringing me face to face with the past I had left behind at a remote Montana gas station. 8 years had passed since that fateful day at the gas station. In those years, Montana had witnessed significant changes in its political landscape, not least of which was James Sullivan's successful campaign for governor following Eleanor Hughes's retirement. His victory had been a surprise to political pundits, but not to those of us who knew him well. His combination of academic intelligence and small-town pragmatism resonated with voters tired of partisan extremes. As for me, I had made the transition from advisor to First Lady of Montana, a role I approached with the same practical problem-solving attitude that had served me well throughout my second life. Rather than focusing on ceremonial aspects of the position, I expanded my advocacy work for seniors and added initiatives supporting rural education and healthcare access. Life in the governor's mansion was a far cry from my widow's existence in Boise, or even my independent life in Helena. Security personnel staff and the constant presence of political aides took some adjustment. But James and I had created private spaces within the public demands, carving out time for quiet evenings together despite his demanding schedule. The annual Moonlight Charity Gala in Helena had become one of the most prestigious social events in the state during Eleanor's administration, and James and I continued the tradition. The event raised funds for various Montana charities while providing an opportunity for business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists to network in elegant surroundings. That year's gala fell exactly 8 years and 3 months after my abandonment. I had long since stopped tracking the anniversary, having moved so completely into my new identity that the gas station incident felt like something that had happened to someone else. Irene Patterson had been left behind. Irene Caldwell, First Lady of Montana, had emerged. I was circulating among guests in the grand ballroom of the Helena Hotel, engaged in conversation with the president of the state university about potential expansions to their gerontology program when I felt a strange sensation. The particular awareness of being watched intently. Looking up, I met the gaze of a woman across the room, who was staring at me with an expression of absolute shock. Even from a distance, I recognized Amanda immediately. Her features had matured fine lines now visible around her eyes, but she was unmistakably my daughter. She wore an elegant black dress and stood beside a man I didn't recognize, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Time seemed to stop as our eyes locked. 8 years of building a new life suddenly compressed into a single moment of recognition. I excused myself from the university president and moved deliberately toward a side door, knowing Amanda would follow. Some conversations weren't meant for public consumption. I found a small meeting room off the main hallway and waited, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't since the day I had been left alone at that gas station. Less than a minute later, the door opened, and Amanda stepped inside, her face pale with disbelief. "Mom." Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying it louder might break whatever illusion she thought she was experiencing. "Hello, Amanda." My voice was steadier than I felt. "You're alive." It was a statement of the obvious, but I understood the shock behind it. As you can see, you're the governor's wife. This seemed to bewilder her even more than finding me alive. Yes. Amanda's initial shock was transforming rapidly into anger. 8 years. You've been gone for 8 years without a word. Do you have any idea what we've been through? The searching, the worry, the not knowing? I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. I think we both know there wasn't much actual searching, Amanda. I wasn't hiding. I built a new life right here in Montana. How were we supposed to know that you disappeared from a gas station in the middle of nowhere? After you drove away and left me there, I reminded her, my voice still calm but firm. Amanda's face flushed. That was a stupid prank. We came back for you 2 hours later. And when I wasn't there waiting obediently for your return, you assumed I'd gotten a ride to teach you a lesson. That's what you said in your voicemail, remember? The mention of the voicemail seemed to throw her. You got our messages. And you still didn't call us back. I listened to your messages. I heard how quickly your concern turned to annoyance, then to accusations that I was being dramatic as usual. It was quite illuminating hearing how my children really saw me. Amanda ran a hand through her carefully styled hair, disrupting it in a gesture I remembered from her teenage years when she was particularly frustrated. I need to call Jackson and Lauren. They need to know about this. I assume you're here representing your law firm, I asked, changing the subject. She nodded distractedly, already pulling out her phone. We represent several Montana-based corporations. I had no idea you were. This. She gestured vaguely at my formal attire, the implied status of my position. You can tell your siblings if you wish, I said, but I'd prefer any reunion happen somewhere private, not at a public charity event. Amanda was already dialing, turning slightly away from me, as if to create privacy in the small room. Jackson, it's me. You need to get to Helena. Now. Bring Lauren if you can reach her. She paused, listening to his response. No, I can't explain over the phone. Just trust me, this is important. Mom important. Another pause. Yes, that kind of mom important. Get here as soon as you can. After ending the call, Amanda turned back to me, her professional composure reasserting itself. They'll drive up tonight. Lauren's staying with Jackson right now, so they'll come together. Fine. You can all come to the mansion tomorrow morning. I'll let security know to expect you. The mansion. The governor's mansion. Amanda repeated this as if still trying to process it. You're married to the governor of Montana. Yes. Does he know about us? About what happened? James knows everything, Amanda. He's known from the beginning. A knock at the door interrupted our tense conversation. James peered in, his expression concerned. Everything all right in here, Irene? You disappeared rather suddenly. I extended my hand to him, which he took immediately, coming to stand beside me. James, this is Amanda, my daughter. To his credit, James barely registered surprise, merely extending his other hand to Amanda with the practiced ease of a politician, Governor James Sullivan. It's a pleasure to meet you, though I understand the circumstances are unusual. Amanda shook his hand automatically, social training overriding her emotional turmoil. Amanda Patterson Harper, I didn't expect to meet you like this. Few things in life turn out as we expect, James replied diplomatically. Especially family matters. I understand you and your siblings will be joining us tomorrow morning. Amanda nodded, seemingly at a loss for words in the face of James's calm acknowledgement of the situation. Wonderful. I'll make sure my schedule is clear so I can be present. Now, if you'll excuse us, Irene and I should return to our guests. Appearances must be maintained, especially at charity functions. He guided me toward the door with a gentle hand at the small of my back. Before leaving, I turned to Amanda once more. 10 o'clock tomorrow. The security gate has an intercom. Just state your names. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of practiced smiles and automatic responses. James kept close to me, his steady presence, a reminder that whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, selecting a simple but elegant blue dress that projected confidence without ostentation. James wore what he called his approachable authority outfit, a quality suit without a tie. Are you ready for this? He asked, as we waited in the main sitting room of the private residence section of the mansion. I've had 8 years to prepare, I replied, though I always imagined it happening differently. On my terms, if at all. At precisely 10 o'clock, our head of security announced the arrival of 3 visitors. Moments later, Amanda entered the room, followed by Jackson and Lauren. The sight of all 3 of my children together after so many years hit me with unexpected force. They had aged, of course. Jackson's artistic scruffiness had matured into a more polished appearance, though he still had creative touches in his clothing choices. Lauren looked more settled, her formerly erratic energy channeled into a confident presence. For a long moment, we all simply stared at each other, the weight of 8 years of absence filling the space between us. James broke the silence. "Please sit down. Can I offer anyone coffee or tea?" This mundane hospitality in the midst of our extraordinary circumstance seemed to break some of the tension. My children seated themselves on the sofa across from where James and I sat in matching armchairs. So Lauren was the first to speak directly to me, her voice tight with emotion. "You've been living the high life, while we thought you might be dead in a ditch somewhere." Amanda cautioned, clearly wanting to maintain some semblance of control over the conversation. "No, I want to hear how she explains this," Lauren continued. 8 years, Mom. 8 years of not knowing. Do you have any idea what that's been like for us? About as difficult as being abandoned at a gas station, and then blamed for my own disappearance. I imagine I replied evenly. Jackson, always the quietest of my children, finally spoke. "We came back for you. When we couldn't find you, we filed a missing persons report. We searched Mom." "Did you?" I asked. "Or did you file a report to cover your bases, make some calls, post some concerned social media updates, and then get back to your lives?" The flash of guilt across their faces confirmed my suspicions. Their search had been perfunctory at best. "That's not fair," Amanda protested. "We contacted the police, hired a private investigator for a while. What were we supposed to do?" "Perhaps not abandon your mother at a remote location in the first place," James suggested mildly. All 3 of my children had the grace to look ashamed at this simple statement of fact. "It was a stupid prank," Jackson admitted. "We were angry after that blow-up at dinner, and we just wanted to. I don't know, shake you up a bit, make you see how your behavior affected us. We never meant for you to actually be stranded." "But I was stranded," I reminded them. "And when I wasn't there waiting when you deigned to return, your immediate assumption was that I had manipulated the situation." "Because that's what you always did," Lauren burst out. "Everything was always a manipulation, a guilt trip, a way to control us. After Dad died, it got worse. We couldn't breathe without you judging or criticizing or making us feel guilty." The accusation stung partly because I recognized the truth in it. I was trying to hold our family together after losing your father. Perhaps I went about it wrong, but my intentions were to protect you, not control you. "Intentions don't matter when the impact is harmful," Amanda said, her lawyer's precision evident in the statement. "No, they don't," I agreed, surprising them, which is why when I listened to your voicemails and heard how quickly you turned my victimhood into a narrative about my manipulation, I made the choice not to return to that dynamic. For the next hour, we talked through those first days after the gas station. I explained how Bill and Martha had helped me, how I'd found work in Pinecrest, and how I'd eventually connected with Governor Hughes through the Silver Connections program. I deliberately avoided mentioning their social media performances as the concerned searching children. "So, you just started over," Jackson said when I finished my explanation. "New job, new husband, new name. Completely erased your old life." "Not erased," I corrected. "Transformed. There's a difference." "While we spent 8 years wondering if you were dead or alive," Lauren added bitterly. 8 years building a public narrative about your missing mother while privately knowing exactly what you did to create the situation, I replied, finally addressing what had angered me most over the years. "I saw your posts, Lauren. The tearful photos with my old scarf, the heartfelt pleas for information, all while knowing you had left me at that gas station." The accusation hung in the air, undeniable. My phone chimed with a notification breaking the tense silence. I glanced at it briefly, then looked back at my children with raised eyebrows. 100 unread messages in a family group chat you've apparently started since yesterday. I'm guessing not all of them are expressions of remorse. Amanda had the decency to flush slightly. We were in shock. We still are. Understandable, James interjected smoothly. Finding out your mother is not only alive but married to a governor would be quite the surprise. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that we're here now because of choices everyone in this room made. Irene chose to build a new life, rather than return to what sounds like a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic. You three chose to abandon your mother, and then construct a public narrative that absolved you of responsibility. Jackson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So what happens now? Do we just go back to our lives pretending this never happened? Is this some kind of closure meeting? I considered his question carefully. I don't know, Jackson. I've had 8 years to build a life without you. You've had 8 years to build lives without me. Whether there's a place for us in each other's lives now is something we'd all need to consider carefully. And what about publicly? Amanda asked, ever practical. People will eventually make the connection between Irene Caldwell, First Lady of Montana, and Irene Patterson, missing person. That's a bridge we'll cross when necessary, James replied. For now, I suggest we all take some time to process this reunion before making any decisions about the future. As my children prepared to leave, Lauren hung back slightly. You seem happy, she said quietly, almost accusingly. Happier than you ever were with us. The observation was painfully accurate. I found myself again, I told her honestly. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you are beneath the roles you've played. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the gas station. It was cruel, and we knew better. It wasn't complete accountability, but it was a start. Thank you for saying that, Lauren. After they left, James held me, as I finally allowed myself to feel the full emotional impact of the confrontation. Are you all right? He asked, gently. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I know I don't regret the life we've built together, no matter how it began. My phone continued to chime with messages from my children, 100 notifications and counting. Each one represented a potential step toward reconciliation or a reinforcement of old patterns. Only time would tell which path we would choose. The months following our confrontation at the governor's mansion were some of the most emotionally complex of my life. After 8 years of building a new identity separate from my role as mother, I now faced the challenging prospect of integrating my past with my present. James, ever my steady support, suggested a measured approach. Reconciliation, if that's what you want, won't happen overnight. Small steps, clear boundaries, and honest communication will be essential. Taking his advice to heart, I proposed individual meetings with each of my children, rather than attempting to rebuild relationships with all three simultaneously. The dynamics between us had always been complicated by their relationships with each other, creating alliances and tensions that often overshadowed any progress we might make one-on-one. Amanda was first agreeing to meet me for lunch when business brought her back to Helena a month after our initial confrontation. She arrived at the small private restaurant James had recommended, dressed impeccably in her corporate attorney uniform of a tailored suit and subtle jewelry. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began after we had ordered. No small talk, direct to the point. That much hadn't changed. About, I prompted when she didn't immediately continue. About patterns. In families, in relationships. She twisted her wedding band absently. Richard and I have been in counseling for the past year. Our marriage was falling apart and I couldn't figure out why. The therapist pointed out that I treat him exactly the way I felt you treated Dad. Controlling, critical, always expecting perfection. The parallel hadn't occurred to me, but it made painful sense. We often replicate what we know even when we don't intend to. I'm trying to break the cycle, Amanda admitted. With Richard, with my kids. I don't want Emma and James to feel about me the way I felt about you. Her honesty opened a door for my own. I wasn't a perfect mother, Amanda. After your father died, I was terrified of losing anything else, including control. I thought if I could just manage everything perfectly, keep you all on the right paths, nothing else bad would happen. I understand that better now, she said quietly, but understanding doesn't erase the damage. No, it doesn't. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for the ways my fear manifested as control. Our lunch continued with careful conversation, neither of us quite ready to fully lower our guards, but both making tentative steps toward understanding. By the time we parted, we had agreed to monthly phone calls. A small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Jackson proved more difficult to reach both literally and figuratively. Always the most sensitive of my children, he had also been the most deeply hurt by my controlling behavior and subsequent disappearance. When he finally agreed to meet, he chose a park in Missoula where he had relocated his art studio. We walked in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "Your leaving changed everything for me." I waited, sensing he needed to express himself without interruption. At first I was just angry, then guilty, then both. I started painting these abstract pieces, all dark colors and jagged lines. They were the first work of mine that actually sold well. He laughed humorlessly. Turns out my pain was marketable. Art often is, I observed. It helps others process their own emotions. Jackson nodded. Eventually I realized I was using you as an excuse. For my financial struggles, for my creative blocks, for everything. When I stopped doing that, started taking responsibility for my own life, things improved. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. I'm not saying what we did wasn't wrong, he clarified quickly. It was. But you leaving forced me to grow up in ways I needed to. This sentiment echoed in different ways through all three of my conversations with my children, became the foundation for our tentative rebuilding. The cruel act of abandonment, and my subsequent choice to begin anew, had ironically created space for growth on both sides. Lauren predictably was the most emotionally volatile during our first meeting. Tearful one moment, defensive the next, she cycled through anger, guilt, and reconciliatory impulses with dizzying speed. I hated you for so long, she confessed during a particularly raw moment, for being so critical, for never supporting my marriages, for making me feel like I was always disappointing you. Then I hated you for disappearing, for making us the bad guys in everyone's eyes. Now I don't know what to feel. You don't have to know right now, I assured her. We have time to figure it out. 4 months after our initial confrontation, the story inevitably leaked to the media. A junior reporter for the Helena Daily News made the connection between Irene Patterson, reported missing from Idaho 8 years prior, and Irene Caldwell, First Lady of Montana. The headline was "Sensational Governor's Wife's Secret Past, Missing Mom or Runaway Wife." James and I had prepared for this eventuality. Rather than hiding from the story, we decided to control the narrative. We granted a single interview to a respected journalist known for her thoughtful approach to complex human interest stories. Some might see this as a scandal, the journalist suggested during our interview, the wife of Montana's governor concealing her identity, her past. I see it as a story of resilience and reinvention, I replied. After a family conflict led to my being abandoned in rural Montana, I found kindness from strangers and ultimately built a new life. It's a story about second chances and the possibility of growth even after profound betrayal. The published article was surprisingly balanced, presenting both my perspective and acknowledging the complexity of family dynamics without casting clear villains or heroes. Public reaction was mixed but largely sympathetic, particularly after my children issued a joint statement acknowledging their role in the original incident and expressing their desire for privacy as we work toward reconciliation. In the end, we decided to use the publicity as an opportunity to highlight family reconciliation and second chances. James's administration launched a series of initiatives supporting family counseling services and conflict resolution programs. I incorporated elements of my personal story into my advocacy work, emphasizing how community support had been crucial to my rebuilding. Gradually, over the course of 2 years, my relationships with my children evolved into something new. Not a return to our previous dynamic, which would have been neither possible nor desirable, but the creation of something healthier. We established boundaries, acknowledged past hurts, without allowing them to define our present, and discovered common ground as the adults we had all become. 10 years after that fateful day at the gas station, we gathered for Thanksgiving at the governor's mansion. The table had expanded to include not just my 3 children, but their partners, my grandchildren, and even Bill and Martha, the 2 strangers whose kindness had set me on this unexpected path. Looking around at this blended family, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. The cruel prank that was meant to teach me a lesson had indeed been educational, though not in the way my children had intended. It had taught me about my own strength, about the possibility of beginning again, about the capacity for growth and change, even in our later years. Before we eat, James said, raising his glass in a toast. "I want to acknowledge how extraordinary it is that we're all here together. 10 years ago, none of us could have imagined this moment. It reminds me that even our worst mistakes and deepest hurts can sometimes lead to unexpected blessings." My grandchildren, too young to fully understand the complex history that had led to this gathering, simply saw a family celebrating together. Perhaps that was the greatest gift of all the knowledge that we had managed to transform our broken relationships into something that could provide a healthier foundation for the next generation. Later that evening, after our guests had departed, James found me standing at the window of our private quarters looking out at the lights of Helena. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "I was thinking about how sometimes the worst moments in our lives open doors to our best futures," I replied. "Being left behind at that gas station was humiliating and painful, but it set me free in ways I couldn't have imagined. Life has a strange way of giving us what we need, even when it looks nothing like what we wanted," James observed. "Indeed it does," I agreed, leaning back into his embrace. "The lesson I never expected to learn is that sometimes you have to lose your way completely to find your true path." My journey from abandoned mother to governor's wife had been unconventional, to say the least, but it had taught me that our identities are never fixed, our stories never truly finished. Even at 67, I had discovered that life could offer new beginnings, unexpected joy, and the chance to rewrite what we thought was the ending. What about you? Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something positive in your life? Or have you had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this story touched you, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest transformations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that it is never too late to begin again.